Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Thomas Carruthers, Vice President for Studies here at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and I'm the moderator of our session today on the Community of Democracies. As I think most of you know, the Community of Democracies was established in the year 2000 at an inaugural conference in Warsaw. And the community's purpose, as set out in its founding documents from the Warsaw Conference, are to strengthen and consolidate democratic institutions and to advance the adherence to democratic values around the world. After the Warsaw Conference, there have been ministerial conferences held over the last 11 years in South Korea, Chile, Mali, Portugal, and most recently in Lithuania. Over these years, the community has generated a lot of activity, but also along the way, a lot of uncertainty and a lot of questions about its purpose and its value. And I think the three main questions that have been on people's mind over the last 10 years have been really first the question of membership, the question of inclusivity versus exclusivity of membership, whether or not the community had found the right balance in that regard. Second issue has been, what does it really do? People meet at ministerial conferences, they talk, they have a good time, they affirm the value of democracy, but what more? And third, there's also been the question of the US role. Many people have seen the community as a US initiative in some way, despite the presidencies or chairmanships or leadership of other countries along the way. And for some countries, that's been off-putting, and they felt that this is a US influenced or led or directed initiative they don't want to be part of. This, of course, was especially an issue during the middle years of the last decade, when America's role as a supporter or promoter of democracy in the world became especially controversial, and therefore things associated with the United States on the multilateral domain raised issues and concerns. But in the last couple of years, the community has shown some new signs of life. The Lithuanian presidency was an active one. Lithuania engaged very seriously in the topic, and new initiatives, new undertakings were set up, which we'll hear about today. And now Mongolia has taken up the presidency and seems to also be very committed to the task. And so there's some question now about where are we with the community. To talk about that, we've taken advantage of the fact that the governing council of the community met today here in Washington. And so we have some people who are associated with that, both here and out in the audience as well. And we're going to hear from all four of the people up here with me on the panel. Let me just briefly introduce them. Delighted first to introduce Samantha Power, who is Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Multilateral Affairs and Human Rights at the Executive Office of the President. More importantly, she's a former junior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment, and we're always glad to have her back. There's a few memos which you didn't finish, Samantha, which we have waiting upstairs in an office for you. So if you have a little time afterwards, you can get to those. And then we're going to hear from Evaldas Ignatavicius, who is the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs from Lithuania, and has also served as his country's ambassador to Germany and in other senior positions in Lithuania's diplomatic service. Then we'll be hearing from Ambassador Suram Badral, who is Mongolia's ambassador at large to the Community of Democracies and has taken on that role recently as part of the Mongolian presidency. And last but by no means least, Tamaika Tillman, who is senior advisor on civil society and emerging democracies to the Secretary of State. So we're going to start with Samantha, then turn to Evaldas, Ambassador Badral, and Tamaika. Samantha.
Great, thank you, Tom. And yes, I did work here when I was in my very early 20s. It was my very first job out of college, but we were not called anything as glamorous as junior fellows. We were called interns, just for the record. But it's really great to be back at Carnegie. I love coming back. And it's hard to think of a single individual who's done as much to enhance our understanding of democracy promotion, the challenges faced by democracy, the challenges faced by democracy promoters, as Tom Carruthers. So it's a particular pleasure to be back here, Tom, with you, as well as with Tamaika, my tireless colleague, the Senior Advisor for Civil Society and Emerging Democracies, who has really shepherded this administration's heightened engagement with the Community of Democracies. Evaldas Ignatavicius of Lithuania, I'll just call him Valdis, who really played just such a critical role, as Tom indicated, rejuvenating the community of democracies in ways I think that few thought possible when Lithuania took over the chair. And I know it was a whole of government effort, but you've been a real engine for that. And I'm delighted to meet for the first time Suren Bajral, who I take it is picking up right up where Lithuania left off, and that's very exciting to think about this, your tenure in the chairmanship role. Needless to say, if you had to invent the perfect time for countries as enthusiastic and committed as Lithuania and Mongolia to assume the chairmanship of the Community of Democracies and breathe life into it, you would have chosen this 2-year period of time, I think, the time of the Arab Spring, and so much change and transition around the world. So we also commend the great foresight of the countries who had somehow knew that Lithuania, that it was the right time and the right place, and so too with Mongolia. The real experts on the Community of Democracies are those who participate in it here in a very active way, and many of you who have studied it analytically. So I'm just going to make 3 points here off the top to just get us started. As Tom indicated, when the CD was founded in Warsaw by Secretary Albright and the former Polish Foreign Minister Bronislaw Geremek, it was designed to be the global forum singularly dedicated to the promotion of democracy. And with some early fanfare and enthusiasm, it's of course no secret that early enthusiasm around the CD had diminished by the end of its first decade of life. The measure of any organization is tangible results, and has to be. And the CD was, I think, slow to be able to show real-world results, and as a result, attention, the level of participation from governments, the curiosity of those who were not actively part of the Community of Democracies about getting into the community, all that faded, I think, pretty substantially. But again, over the past 2 years, I think there really have been some genuine signs of transformation from a kind of aspirational forum to an operational platform. And indeed, again, my first point is that it does feel as if we're on the brink of the CD being transformed from a gathering of democracies to a platform for democracies to actually get things done. And at the Vilnius Ministerial in July, I think, again, it's worth noting that the CD adopted a far-reaching package of reforms that are designed to address many of the organizational challenges, perhaps not all, that have hindered its effectiveness up until the last couple years. The new governing council, which has replaced the so-called convening group, is, I think it's fair to say, less focused on process and more on substantive outcomes. It is succeeding already. We're seeing it. Mike and others can speak to this, but it succeeded in generating a level of engagement from governments that's much higher than it used to be, and that in turn, of course, creates more policy results. And I think perhaps more importantly, in the long term, this new governing council will no longer require consensus in order to reach decisions, but will at least have the option of decisions by qualified majority, so less of a chance of lowest common denominator decision making. Now, the United States has really been committed to that reform. As Tom indicated, people can agree to disagree about whether that's a good thing, but we think it's a very important aspect of the Community of Democracies, and we think we're already seeing the fruits of this very sustained and intensive engagement. The CD's working group on civil society has successfully rallied the international community to prevent passage of 5 proposed restrictive NGO laws around the world, 5. And as many of you know, that's a very, very disturbing trend that we're seeing around the world, the introduction of restrictive laws on funding, on freedom of assembly, on speech, and so forth. And countries and governments are learning from one another. And it's incredibly important that there be a bulwark against that, and the CD, has tried to make itself that, I think, in a relatively short period of time. The Canadian-chaired working group focused on defending civil society, I think, offers a case study in how partnerships between governments and civil society can yield real-world results, because, of course, the activism to contest these laws is usually fueled by civil society activists and advocates, and reinforced and spearheaded by governments in parallel. I would note, of course, that those NGO laws are continuing to be introduced, and as governments work hard to restrict funding, assembly, speech, et cetera, we will need to work harder, again, in conjunction with civil society, we governments and we civil society groups, and we will need to establish more diverse coalitions to be able to successfully contest these restrictions. So this trend isn't going anywhere, but it's up to the CD to stand and be prepared to challenge it. One of the most exciting developments in the CD is seeing the extent to which the community is prepared to support its newest members and the newest democracies. Every nation that has come through a transition to democracy has had help along the way, including the United States. And as nations embark on the journey that is democracy, I think all of us have an opportunity and indeed an obligation to be partners to those at the earlier stages of that pathway. The Democracy Partnership Challenge, launched at the Vilnius Ministerial, is an excellent example of how we can use the CD to channel concrete support to countries in the midst of promising transitions. Right now, the CD's resources and expertise are assisting the emerging democracies of Tunisia and Moldova. Indeed, Tunisia's foreign minister recently called the CD a key partner in Tunisia's transition to democracy. And here, before I get to my second point, I would just quote a line from President Obama taken from his 2010 speech before the UN General Assembly, where he said, "I appeal to those nations who emerged from tyranny and inspired the world in the second half of the last century, from South Africa to South Asia, from Eastern Europe to South America. Don't stand idly by, don't be silent when dissidents elsewhere are imprisoned and protesters are beaten. Recall your own history." And then again, I think the great line, because part of the price of our own freedom is standing up for the freedom of others. And so this challenge that we need to issue to countries that have, again, had the privilege and the courage to come through those transitions, to be part of partnering with those countries that haven't yet completed their journey or embarked further along their journey. The Community of Democracies has become an important venue for us to stand in solidarity, both with the newest members of the CD and, frankly, with the citizens of those countries that long to become democratic. So that's another important role. Second point I'd make, just very briefly, is that while the CD is the emphasis of our discussion here today and is well worth that emphasis, it is one platform among several that I think are cropping up to enable this kind of lesson learning, coalition building, and technical assistance provision. And here I'd highlight the groundbreaking Open Government Partnership, which President Obama launched on the margins of this year's UN General Assembly, along with Brazil, with whom we co-chair this effort, South Africa, Indonesia, Mexico, the Philippines, the UK, and Norway, and which nearly 40 other countries have already agreed to join. Each of the countries that are part of OGP commit to delivering very specific and concrete national action plans on how they intend to fight corruption, promote transparency, and empower citizens, including by harnessing new technologies. For a country to be admitted to the OGP, the Open Government Partnership, these plans have to be developed in close consultation with civil society. So just as the Community of Democracies, an international framework, has spurred greater cooperation between governments and civil society groups at home, sort of vertical cooperation, so too has the OGP. And indeed, we learned a lot in looking at the Community of Democracies and how it had progressed over the years. And in both the OGP and the CD, the United States is intent on ensuring that the foundation for our leadership in these venues is the willingness to take concrete additional steps to strengthen open government and open society at home. The premise of both forums, also, it's worth noting, is that governments don't have a monopoly on good ideas. Needless to say, it's critical that we benefit from the wisdom and experiences of civil society, the private sector, and individual citizens, as a government's commitment to accountability is largely meaningless without activated citizens who hold government accountable both at the ballot box and in telling governments how their policies are actually lived and experienced by real people. My third and final point is that we actually don't have the luxury of failing to make the Community of Democracies more effective in the lives of real people. The real world exigent needs right now are too great. From 1989 to 2009, the number of democracies in the world grew from 69 to 119. And even before the Arab Spring, the world was averaging 2 transitions a year. When a transition occurs, as Secretary Clinton likes to say, there's no playbook. We all know that transitions will and must remain completely indigenous. History shows that even the rocky early years of transition and the trial and error that often ensues is experience that helps societies evolve and helps citizens tailor their nascent institutions to their very particular cultural culture and needs. Nonetheless, we only need to hear the appeals of civil society advocates, independent journalists, and newly elected representatives in Tunisia or recently tapped ministers in Libya to know that the desire, the hunger for peer-to-peer consultation is nearly insatiable. And while the answers that each particular society provides to transition dilemmas will be each society's own answers, the questions that one needs to ask do recur with remarkable consistency across time, geography, and culture. Some of those questions, the obvious ones: how does a society in transition handle reform of the judicial sector, the security sector? How does such a society time or structure elections or sequence parliamentary and presidential elections? How does one develop an independent media sector after years without one? How does one balance the need for accountability with the need to avoid vengeance? How can one use citizen oversight, bureaucratic incentives, and new technologies to fight corruption? What does a government code of ethics look like? How should women be integrated into decision-making processes? The list goes on. All of these questions and more, it's safe to say, benefit from history and experience. The Community of Democracies is just one forum to bring countries together to share their insights on these questions, but I think it is an ever more promising one. This administration, again, is deeply committed to strengthening the CD, to continuing to prioritize the values that are at its core in all of our bilateral and multilateral relationships, and to supporting societies in transition on their hopeful paths to prosperity, peace, and democracy. I would note in closing that these are the early years of the Renaissance for the CD. People will look back, they'll say there's the early Renaissance, and then there was the later Renaissance. But I'm confident that the organization's most relevant years lie ahead, not least because of the leadership of the gentleman on this stage. Now I look forward to hearing the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. An excellent overview and introduction. Ambassador Ignatovici.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Samantha, for giving such a comprehensive introduction on what the COD is about. Preparing to today's meeting of the COD Council and to the discussion here in Carnegie Endowment, I somehow started hearing the voice of the famous American singer of the Lithuanian origin, Leonard Cohen, "Democracy is coming to the USA." So it's really good to be here and to discuss democracy in the United States, where the first constitution has been written, and we as the authors of the second written constitution, together with Poles, always back in 1791, always felt that democracy is at stake at the region where we live. Some countries always preferred stability to the democracy and challenges, say then, of the ideas of the French Revolution. And over the decades, the situation has not changed too much. Democracy is still at stake in our part of the world, in our region, and therefore my answer to the question of today's discussion is the Community of Democracies coming out of age? Is it getting useless? Is definite no. It's still needed in the Eastern Europe, where the democratic reforms are being challenged by different factors, and in the rest of the world. There is a rise, we feel now, and witness the rise of democracy in one regions, like North Africa. We feel shrinking democracies elsewhere. We see struggle for democracy and for human rights in different countries, like, for example, my neighboring Belarus. So, well, democracy is a living thing, and I would say that our choice to run the chairmanship of the Community of Democracies was a natural one. To use our energy, to use our experience of gaining freedom, of introducing democratic reforms, of introducing human rights in our political life, and our experience in working out democracy in relations with our neighbors. So we took this challenge very seriously. We prepared for our chairmanship in the COD in a very serious way, and our current ambassador in Washington, Žygimantas Pavilionis, took over the post of the special envoy ambassador for COD affairs very, very seriously, and we then thought immediately about what could we do, and we then tried immediately to kind of refocus, revitalize the activities of the Community of Democracies to make it more inclusive. And today I had a pleasure to welcome in the Governing Council of the COD new members of the Governing Council, such as Nigeria or Sweden or Canada, and that means that the community is expanding, that it's no more a club of the Western democracies, that Community of Democracies is becoming an kind of ownership of different regions worldwide, and it's really a good feeling. And another kind of positive feeling that I have now is that democracy is increasingly important phenomena in the foreign and development policy agendas, both in the European Union and in the United States, when we discuss different things, be it foreign policy issues or development projects. And I would just mention one of the latest projects, EU Endowment for Democracy, which has the task to assist democracies in the EU partner countries. What I think we tried and managed to achieve partially is a synergy between different democracy thinkers from Washington, Brussels, up to new EU member states and also other regions. And I would think that this has to be continued. Open discussions, think tank meetings, discussing different threats and challenges, and also positive elements in building democracies worldwide. I think this is very, very much needed. Parliamentary support for democracy, parliamentary forum has been constructed during our chairmanship in the Community of Democracies. I think this is of extreme importance, since parliaments adopt laws framing the democracies and human rights situation in the countries. So we hope that this dimension of the COD will be strengthened in the period of Mongolian chairmanship and beyond. Youth dimension of the Community of Democracies, I think this is also a very important area, since it is aimed to prepare the future generations to continue the fight for democracy, and ideas of democracy has also to become an ownership of the younger generation, extremely active in different forms of new medias and well connected to each other. Well, we have tried to target special areas by initiating working groups. For example, gender equality and women's rights, support to civil society, support to emerging democracies. Tunisia and Moldova were mentioned already. So we hope that those working groups will develop. Some of them are unfortunately a bit in a kind of rudimental phase. So we understand that that community of democracies is developing, but still is not perfect. Maybe I'll mention some of the directions that we think the community of democracies should guide. COD should provide practical, tailored assistance and advice to new emerging democracies and democracies risking to slip into authoritarianism. Well, sometimes we felt that various COD statements on human rights situations and governance in specific countries are not noticed too much, and maybe instead of trying to repeat or replace the activities of the international organizations, practical assistance and advice with a clear understanding of specific needs on the ground, and actions, advice, training, which are tailored to meet those specific needs would be preferred, and specific responses and mechanisms which highlight the value added of COD without seeking to duplicate or compete with existing organizations also is needed. And work on developing our niche strengths and offer them for those in need, networking and creating synergies with other bodies engaged in similar activities. And we should maintain a coalition based on shared values and not create rigid organizational structures. Probably one of the main conclusions that the more time and money we spend building structures and creating COD bureaucracy, the less time and money we'll have for working together with those people who seek democracy and area ready to work hard for it. So I think this is more or less our experience from the activities as a chairman of the Community of Democracies. Now we have taken the experience and the ideas of the chairmanship and continue this as a chairman in office of the OSCE, where we focus on the role of new medias, including internet and social medias, freedom of expression, democratic elections, gender equality, religious tolerance, activities of civil societies and NGOs. And we will organize a major civil society forum next to OSCE ministerial meeting on the 5th and 6th of December. So I think that this is a good sign of interlinkage of COD with international organizations, and I think this is a good example to follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's turn to Ambassador Wadral and the current presidency and plans and initiatives.
I'm honored to be at Carnegie and also with you, this distinguished audience today. Mongolia happens to be at the right place at the right time to be the chair of the community for the coming 2 years. Some might ask why Mongolia. As you know, that our predecessor was Lithuania, a small country. Now Mongolia, also small. Next president would be El Salvador, also small. So we don't think that small countries chair large countries work. No, we also work. Small countries can work too. Why Mongolia? Maybe some might think that with the 20 years of experience of democratic governance, Mongolia might be less experienced, but I don't think it is the case. Because I think that people, everybody is born not only free, but also born Democrat. It can be seen in our experience that our nomadic people always are Democrats, truly born Democrats. Because even during the 70 years of communist rule, the democracy and the democratic principle existed within the families, the nomadic families. So the children of the nomadic families are raised free, raised democratically, and that was built into the minds of the Mongolian people. So that's why in 1990, when we changed our system, when we revolted against the communist rule, there was no bloodshed. There was only peaceful demonstrations. Even the Politburo members of the Mongolian ruling Communist Party agreed that there was need for change. That's why there was some amicable solution that we had succeeded to change the communist system into a democratic one just over a few days or a few weeks. That's why the Mongolians were born and they're still born Democrat, so they have the mindset that always favor the democratic values. That's why we have agreed to chair the city over the next 2 years, and we have put forward a number of priorities to include education for democracy, for example, as one of the top priorities, because we think while people are born free and democrat, their values, their aspirations are taken away by people, institutions, by the governments. So we need to educate people from the childhood into the young age in a democratic values. That's why we have decided that that should be topic not only for small developing countries, but also it will be relevant to advanced democracies, that we can see some individuals in advanced democracies can commit such crime against a democratic system. We will be organizing a number of activities in respect to education for democracy, seminar in Ulaanbaatar, and a conference in India. So we will be trying to mobilize every possible opportunity to raise the need, questions about the need for education for democracy. The second priority is to focus on regional cooperation. Mongolia happens to be the chair during the time when the world major powers are focusing on Asia. Asia is becoming the center of the world politics, and many are looking and moving to Asia. That is very good coincidence, not only for those who are looking into Asia, but also for those who are in Asia. In the past, the Community of Democracies was mostly centering around Europe, Latin America. Now it's time to focus more on Asia and Africa. That's why we have put forward a priority that we should work more in Asia, more in Africa. And our priority has been, again, demonstrated valid by the Arab Spring in North Africa and Arab Peninsula. Of course, we will be working actively with the civil society. We will be looking forward to exchange experiences among different democratic countries. We have been also honored to chair the community during the period when the community is becoming more vibrant, live organization. It is, on one hand, it's a really tough task for us to carry out this reform process that we took over from Lithuania, but we will do, because it is the demand from the time, and also it is the need by all of us. Within the community, we have seen a lot of very good chemistry that different countries that belong to the community work together to uphold the values, ideals of the community, and we can work together for the good of all of us. Number of initiatives we have already put forward since we had taken over the chairmanship last July. We, in addition to a number of international activities, we also have initiated a group of leaders who would be promoting the education for democracy at the highest level of the political circles in different countries. Our president has formed, together with the president of Nigeria, Finland, and the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, an initiative group on education for democracy that was launched last September at the United Nations in New York. Also, at the initiative of our president and the president of the Republic of Korea, we have put forward an initiative that is called Asian Partnership Initiative for Democracy, APID, which is about to bring all democratic societies in Asia together so that they can work in the interest of all Asian nations' aspirations for democracy. As part of that initiative, the chairmanship of the community, that is Mongolia, will be working very actively, especially with regard to Myanmar. We are going to organize a mission to Myanmar to encourage and also to provoke, if you wish, the current authorities of Myanmar to be more open than now, but we would be at the same time would be welcoming what the authorities of Myanmar have done so far, and we also would like to have Aung San Suu Kyi to be a very important part of our community, if not now, then in the future. This kind of regional works would be important for us to focus on in the coming 2 years. I think I have noticed some I would say the fault line in the past. I think maybe I'm not correct. Maybe not. That in the past, I think in the terms of promoting the democracy, we mostly have been working in the language of academic people, I would say. But I would say it would be rather more broader effect would be if we would take language of layman's language in terms of promoting and explaining what is democracy about. So I like to compare democracy as air. So the air is always the same in every country in the world. But in some cases, the industrialization and the negative impact by human activities pollute the air. But the pollution needs to be tackled with the joint efforts of the national community. So air, the composition of air is the same almost in every country. So democracy, that's why, is universal. It's not something belongs to any country. Even it is not the invention of the United States. It was long before the current industrial age that democracy existed. Even in the Middle Age, when Mongolia was the largest empire of the world, the Genghis Khan, for example, was elected, not appointed by an assembly of chieftains. So this is one of the examples that democracy is a common human value, and everybody is born Democrat. So we need to nurture this value in every child, and up until when a man or woman becomes an adult and can choose the right direction of the livelihood. I would stop here, and I would be ready to take some questions if necessary. So I would like to.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thank you very much. An excellent overview of plans and ideas. I'm going to turn to Micah. Let me just mention, I'm looking at my clock, that the Vice Minister has to slip away soon to another engagement. He has a tight schedule, and I suspect Samantha will melt away at some point, but I'll leave that to her. But we have the present and then also the U.S. policy perspective here. We'll hear from Micah, and then I want to hear your comments and questions. And already I see some people in the room who've also been very associated. Maria Leisner from Sweden, a senior Swedish diplomat who's been also fundamental in helping advance democracy diplomacy. And we also have Moldova's ambassador, Ambassador Munteanu, and Moldova has an interesting partnership with the community, which we might hear a bit about. So, to Micah.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you to Carnegie for organizing this event. You've all heard a lot of details already, so I will just share the story of a conversation that I had in my office yesterday when the senior official of a country that is a new member of the Community of Democracies came to me and sat down and said, "We have a challenge. Our political leadership has told us, given us a directive, that we need to work on democracy support, but we've never done this before. We don't really know how to make this happen. We're really excited. We want to make this work. We want to be effective, but we don't have any platform for getting the job done. How do we do this?" And fortunately, we have an answer to this question in the form of the Community of Democracies. And to quickly address the questions that Tom raised in his introduction on membership, we've recognized that it's not useful to have a big debate every 2 years about who gets to attend a ministerial meeting if the only point of that is to attend a ministerial meeting. So we've instead moved to this new system of a governing council where a small number of democracies that are willing to share in the heavy lifting that goes along with actually supporting democracy are coming together on a regular basis, and they form the new core of the community. This morning, of course, we welcomed Costa Rica as a new member of that group, but it's a small but committed cadre of democracies that going forward will provide the muscle necessary to perform the work of the community. Secondly, on the purpose, we see that the community has a key role both in supporting countries in transition and also in strengthening civil society in countries where there is no democracy. The community has been actively engaged on both of these fronts, and we're looking forward for that engagement continuing, particularly in places like Moldova and Tunisia, where the community has launched task forces comprised of both governments and civil society, which is a critical element of the community, in order to help identify and support priorities that we have worked to identify in partnership with these governments. And finally, on the U.S. role, there was a time, and I think we all recognize this, when the U.S. was one of, if not the vital engines of the Community of Democracies. The U.S. is still playing a critical leadership role. We're very proud of that role, but the reality is today we have more and more partners who are coming to the table, and just like the senior official of a foreign government who was in my office yesterday, they're saying we want to help in this effort. We want to be a part of this work. And this is a moment in history when there is a tremendous opportunity to strengthen democracy, and the United States isn't, fortunately, the only country that recognizes that. So this is a great moment, I think, for the Community of Democracies, but Samantha is exactly right. The organization's best days are ahead, and I think we've got a lot of work yet to do.
Thank you, Micah. We're going to now turn to your questions and comments, which will be directed at these two. And if you two would like to step down, that's great. Let me ask the first question just to get the discussion underway. Ambassador Badral, and also to Micah, you mentioned the question of small countries, large countries. One of the interesting phenomena of the last couple of years is that some of the large countries in the developing world, some of the new democracies, I'm thinking of India, Indonesia, Turkey, Brazil, some of the countries with larger population, larger territory, have begun taking up at least partially a role. Do you think that this might be something that would be tied to the community? Have they shown an interest in participating in the community? Is there some relationship here that you would like to note?
Absolutely. A number of those countries are already involved in the community in some respect. Others, like Indonesia, have, I think, begun what we hope will be a very profitable flirtation with the community and are becoming more and more interested in the community's activities. We see some countries like India that historically have not played a significant role in democracy support, increasingly stepping forward on areas like elections and saying, we in India have developed some considerable expertise in this area, and we're interested in sharing that expertise with others who would like to benefit from it. And in terms of the community as a whole, this is exactly the type of exchange that we can facilitate with its networks and mechanisms. So we see this as a big step in the right direction. And fortunately, India isn't the only example of rising democratic power that is seeking to expand its engagement.
Let me ask just one more question before I turn to the crowd, and you'll permit me, Mr. Ambassador, I like to ask hard questions. That's what I do for a living, so let me ask you one. I wonder what China thinks of the Community of Democracies. And now that the chairmanship or presidency resides in Mongolia, right on the border, I wonder what they think about that. And what are the ideas that the community that you think has, possibly under Mongolia's chairmanship, of engaging with China in some relationship in terms of discussion or, just better understanding of the relationship between the community and countries, important countries like China that are not members?
I haven't yet asked the Chinese authorities about how they think about of the community, but I would suspect that China wouldn't be much interested and would be kind of ignorant of the community, because the goals we pursue with the community wouldn't be what the government in China would be in agreement with. So I would better just leave China as it is now, and I don't want to provoke any negative reaction on their part. Yeah, it is very challenging for us because Mongolia is between Russia and China. Both are not considered democratic countries. So it is difficult to survive between these two giant neighbors while speaking loudly and internationally about the need for democratic changes. But we cannot say directly you should do that in Russia or China explicitly, because that would give us some problem with them.
Thanks very much. Let's take your comments and questions, and if you could identify yourself, that would be helpful to the crowd as well. Yeah, right there in the middle. And I think that's Michael Allen from the National Endowment for Democracy, who's so prolific and such a presence in Washington that we listed him twice on the agenda. Give you full,
I thought it was the other Michael Allen from Politico, the famous one. Yeah, Michael Allen with the NED. Both Tom and Tamika raised this question of criteria of inclusion and exclusion. And it reminded me at the ministerial in Lisbon a few years back, a number of us witnessed the celebrated dissident Saadetdine Ibrahim being publicly, verbally abused by representatives from the then Mubarak regime. And that's always stayed fresh in our minds about who gets invited to these meetings, not only as a kind of procedural issue, but because it also has important, to put it mildly, ideological implications, given, as we know, everybody claims to be democratic today. Russia has sovereign democracy and so on and so forth. And the brand, so to speak, is becoming adulterated if we don't say what democracy stands for. So my question is, what are the kinds of criteria that you are establishing or have established to ensure that we have inclusion, but not at the expense of integrity?
Speak to that. Within the Governing Council, which, as I've said, is the new core of the community, we have a very simple process. Once we got through the initial round of expansion, and there was a list of countries that we drew up in partnership with civil society that included nations like Japan, Sweden, Canada, and Costa Rica that I mentioned previously. We said anyone who wants to come in after this, before they get in the door, civil society is going to review their application. And the civil society organizations that participate in the Community of Democracies are going to look at the various indices that keep track of democracy metrics and are going to decide whether a country is up to the challenge of joining the Governing Council. So we take this very seriously, and we hope that this new approach of having mandatory consultations with civil society when a country applies for membership in the Governing Council is going to help us resolve that issue.
And what's the relationship going to be between the Governing Council and the sort of traditional sort of membership in the community, or the status of member? Is it a two-tier structure now?
The Governing Council sets the agenda for the Community of Democracies. The Governing Council decides what initiatives the community is going to launch. The ministerial meetings will frankly be ministerial meetings going forward, and then there'll be an opportunity for countries to come together and discuss some of these issues. But we realized that in order to succeed, the community needed to be more than the invite list of a ministerial. And that's why we've re-energized this central body as the real vital core of the community that's going to be doing the heavy lifting.
Okay, yeah. Right behind you there, yeah, right in the, there's a microphone, yeah.
Ben Riley, SciS. Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Badrell, question about the Asian Democracy Initiative that you mentioned, which sounds almost identical to the Asia-Pacific Democracy Partnership, which was a US initiative that's kind of just withered slowly on the vine, I think would be a fair description, over the last few years. You know, trying to get Asian Community of Democracy members to work together. You know, as you would be aware, there is a rival Asian Democracy Initiative which does include China and Vietnam and Myanmar and all the others, the Indonesian Bali democracy process, which has been more popular in Asia, shall we say. So I'm just wondering why, given that you're replicating an initiative that came from the US that doesn't seem to have worked, you know, why we should expect it to work this time?
Yeah, that is a question that I'm asked frequently by a number of acquaintances of mine. The APDP, that is the initiative of President George Bush, put forward at the APEC meeting in 2007, has been kind of too large initiative to encompass not only the Asian countries, also it would be covering also Pacific countries. In addition, also it would have been also a part of the APEC process. Then, because it was too large in terms of covering countries and areas, it didn't work well. Actually, I think it has been dormant for last couple of years. The current host of the initiative, the Republic of Korea, tried to pass on the hosting of the initiative to another country, but there was no country to be willing to accept. That means there was no interest from other parts of the Asia-Pacific region. The APDP has been working mostly on election support area, and it did work in only some Pacific Island countries, but it didn't work in the continental Asia because the other countries didn't accept it as proper. As for the Bali Democracy Forum, it has some different angle of looking at democracy. Indonesia, the host country, thinks that democracy can be different from country to country based on their cultural identity, civilization's identity. So Indonesia maintains that democracy in the United States and Indonesia is different. So that is not what we share in Mongolia, for example. At the same time, the Bali Democracy Forum is just a kind of conference. It meets every year, that's it. No action, no real practical work to promote democracy. So our initiative was to add some values to these two. We are not ignorant of the other tools, but we are working with our Korean colleagues how to merge, if possible, these three initiatives. Especially now we are working how to merge the Asia Pacific Asian Partnership Initiative for Democracy, that is ours, with the APDP. I think we have in principle agreed that these two can be put together so that we could have more vibrant initiative platform for our efforts in Asia.
Let me just ask about the partnership with Moldova, and it's an example of one of the new initiatives of the community, and I don't quite know what it consists of. It sounds interesting, and I wonder if you could comment a little bit more about it, Tamaika, and then I don't know if Ambassador Muntiano, you'd like to, if you're informed and would be prepared to say something, but I think it would be interesting for people to get a more vivid idea about what this consists of and what shape it might take in the future.
Absolutely. I'm fresh off a plane from Chisinau, and so I'm delighted to speak to this. The community started a process early this year where it decided that it wanted to do more to support countries that were in the midst of transition. But we recognized that we needed some architecture if we were going to do that, and we needed a process. Frankly, resources are scarce, and we understood that if we were going to be effective, we needed to focus our efforts. And so we looked around at different models for encouraging reform and seized on the Race to the Top initiative that has been developed by the Department of Education that some of you might be familiar with. And this was a program to spur educational reform at the state level in the United States, which everyone knows has been desperately needed for a long time, but not much had happened in recent decades. And so they set aside some resources and said, we want to see that you're serious, prove to us that you're going to reform, and then the most promising proposals will get the resources. And so we engaged in a very similar process within the community. Together with civil society, we reached out to a number of countries that were in the midst of transition. We solicited applications that outlined both what a country had already done to demonstrate its commitment to reform, and also the areas where it could benefit from additional support from the international community. And then we selected the most promising two applications, and those came from Moldova and Tunisia. And in each case, we created a task force to support transitions in those countries. And the task forces are co-chaired by one country that's a long-time democracy and one country that has just come through a transition itself. So in the case of Moldova, it is the United States and Poland. In the case of Tunisia, it's the Dutch and Slovakia. And then on Sunday of this week, I landed in Moldova together with the Deputy Foreign Minister of Poland. And we conducted a series of meetings with the Prime Minister, with a number of government ministers, with the heads of international missions in Chisinau, to develop an action plan around the priorities that Moldova had outlined. And these include topics like judicial sector reform. And on that issue, we recognized that there was a tremendous lack of trust between the judges who are charged with carrying out public corruption cases and prosecuting them, and the media that can provide political support for those activities. And in consultation with some experts in the field, including some very good justice sector leaders in Poland and the United States, we're now developing some programming to address that challenge. Similarly, we have a lot of civil society organizations in the country that are out in the countryside and don't have access to support from the international community. They don't know how to fill out the applications that would allow them to receive grants. And so we're going to create a one-stop shop, a hub that will help both civil society and local officials access the international resources that are available to support transition in Moldova. We're going to be doing these initiatives, and we hope other initiatives, in close partnership with civil society, which has a seat at the table together with governments in these task forces. And the task force as a whole will have its first meeting on December 7th. So we're looking forward to that. And there's an analogous task force for Tunisia that's doing very similar work.
Ambassador Muntiano, would you like to add a few thoughts?
Thank you very much. And in fact, we are very encouraged to see the first steps for the preparation of the support to Moldova. We are very lucky to be seen as a country that will receive this fundamental and important institutional support for some of the challenges we are facing. What I would like to highlight is that the countries that are receiving and will be receiving support, like Moldova or Tunisia, in the same time, they can be seen as providers of support to others. And it's not very good to see that the countries will only get the support and will not be able to replicate it in other countries. My country, Moldova, is interested also to apply some of its best practices in other areas. One of the questions that probably they are very logical to this discussion is that the new chairs are ready to discover new areas or new regions where the community of democracy will try to measure its forces, and moving the focus from Southeastern Europe to Asia. To what extent we and the community of democracy can ensure a kind of stable establishment of priorities for the coming decade, for instance, looking ahead, how the chairmanship will ensure a kind of balanced approach to the growth of the community itself. This is probably a practical question, not a theoretical one. At the same time, of course, we are very happy to see Moldova as a kind of demonstrational case that can provide guarantees that the countries are really benefiting from the community of democracies. Thank you.
Thanks, Igor. We'll take just a couple more questions or comments. Maria, I wonder if I might just call on you, Maria Leisner from the Swedish government. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Tom. I was actually wanting to bring up one issue that I think Samantha Powers mentioned in the beginning when she said, when she talked about accomplishments, and one of them being the fact that the Special Rapporteur in the UN on freedom of association was actually an effect of networking within the community of democracies. And the UN Democracy Caucus was one part of the vision initially, but it never took off. It never actually worked. It has occasionally produced statements that no one really cared much about. But speaking on behalf of a country that has quite recently gained interest and become active in the community of democracies, Sweden, that is. Our vision of the extra, of the added value of the community of democracies is not another institution or organization that is going to ask for money for projects that will be implemented on the ground, but a completely different one, namely a framework for how governments can work together as governments. And do exactly what we've been discussing, have joint missions like the Democracy Challenge initiatives and the task forces in Tunisia and Moldova, the civil society warning system, and also what is next on my personal wish list is having the UN Democracy Caucuses revived. Because I think that if we would be able to create a working level understanding or at least framework where people who are actually part of the various missions belonging to the member countries of the Community of Democracies, who would meet regularly in Geneva and in New York, just to try to find some common ground rather than producing statements. I think that would be the beginning of creating a we of democratic countries, and that I see as the real true value added of the Community of Democracies.
Interesting, very interesting. Thank you. That's a very useful addition. Do I see other questions or comments? Yes, sir. Right. There's a microphone right behind you.
Thank you. My name's Steve Wagenseal. I've worked with the CD since 1999, in fact, one way or another. I was interested in Ambassador Badral's reference to education for democracy, and I'd be interested to hear how Mongolia plans to pursue that initiative. Thank you.
We have I have already told that we have taken a number of steps to materialize the idea of education for democracy as being a universal international goal for the chairmanship of the community. First, we would like to organize a seminar, international seminar in Ulaanbaatar together with UNESCO to work on the pedagogical aspects of education for democracy, to work on the development of curricula for high schools, for universities, so that this common basic curricula can be adapted by different countries, take into account their own local necessities. Then we would be going into India to have a larger setting of gathering where we are planning to bring governments and private sector, of course the civil society, all together to work how the society in general at large can promote education for democracy, how the private sector can play a role, and how the civil society, the academic institutions can contribute, and how the governments can work on their policies. So with the kind of scientific background developed together with UNESCO, we will come to India to present the recommendations from the seminar, but at the same time we will have a broader discussion how all the stakeholders can contribute at the society level to promote education for democracy. Our presidential initiative to have the initiative group on education for democracy is to keep this goal at the highest political level, so that we can alert and also provoke interests at the highest level, so that the people can, the politicians, the leaders of the countries can be aware of. One activity that we are going to carry out is to propose a draft resolution to the coming session, that is 67th session of the UN General Assembly in 2012 on education for democracy. I think in the past, our predecessor, Lithuania, made some reconnaissance among the members of the UN family, but they found it was difficult at that time to submit the draft resolution for consideration. But we will do. We will make some efforts to that, so that the United Nations, its session next year, would approve a resolution on education for democracy. We will then try to, based on that resolution by the General Assembly, to launch sort of a decade for education for democracy, similar to that initiative that was produced and carried out by the United Nations for education for human rights, I think. Human rights education decade. So that is, I think, not finished. I think maybe finished just a while ago. But the same spirit, we were going to launch a decade, maybe in 2013, on education for democracy. We have some experience in promoting such educational activities. I think we have launched together with the UN a decade for literacy. That is our experience. So we, based on our experience, also on the need to have that education for democracy at the UN family, we are planning to have that decade be launched in 2013.
If I can say just one quick word on that, there's been a great deal of interest, particularly from countries like Libya, in this topic, where you're trying to develop a culture of democracy in an area where there hasn't been present before. And so I think it's very timely for Mongolia to be engaged on this front, and hopefully it can be very profitable for countries that are in the midst of these transitions.
Thank you. We have reached our appointed time. Tamika, I want to thank you for having suggested this meeting, and I think the hard work of you and your team shows, and I think it's appreciated. Mr. Ambassador, We appreciate your coming to the Carnegie Endowment, and we wish you well in this important role. Thanks to all for coming, and we'll see you again. Thank you.